I'll call to order this meeting of the King George County Board of Supervisors. We'll start with the invocation by Ms. Kathy Bender, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance by myself.
All please stand. Please, Lord, hear my prayer that everyone keeps cool heads in the times ahead, and that 2021 is a much more positive year than 2020, and to always remember to love your fellow man. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll now begin our portion of the organizational meeting. I'd like to call for nominations for election of a chairman for the King George County Board of Supervisors.
Dr. Young, I would like to nominate Ms. Annie Kupka, our at-large supervisor, for the chairwoman.
Second.
We have a motion that's been properly seconded. Are there any discussions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Congratulations, Ms. Kupka.
Thank you very much, Dr. Young. Thank you to my colleagues for your confidence. We'll now move forward with a call for nominations for election of the vice chair. I move to nominate Mr. Jeffrey Stonehill, the Dahlgren District Supervisor, for vice chair for the 2021 King George County Board of Supervisors.
I second.
We have a motion that's been properly seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. And call for nomination for appointment of clerk.
I will call for the nomination of Dr. Young to be the clerk.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. 2021 public meeting schedule. I will turn it over to Dr. Young. Go ahead, Dr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you can see in the board packet, there has been a proposed meeting schedule for the 2021. I would recommend that the board approve it as presented.
I move to approve the proposed meeting schedule as presented. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Adopt bylaws and rules of procedure. Mr. Britton, would you like to present for us, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
As you know, the board has been operating off a short list, rules and procedure, which is essentially an agenda, an expanded agenda, and then a board manual. I'm not exactly sure of the state of that when it was last reviewed or adopted, and the code of ethics. So as discussed back about April, first with Mr. Stonehill, and then with other members of the board, we put together a plan for me to review the institutional documents of each of the county boards, authorities, and commissions, going first with the Board of Supervisors and implementing bylaws, which would be a more comprehensive look at rules and procedures, operating bylaws, and ethics all rolled into one. I believe the document balances, well, it does balance the current law, but it also balances having information in there, such as the important Roberts rules, what happens, the usual things where people say, hey, what happens if there's a tie vote, or who can bring it back, those things, without having the entire Roberts rules in there. It also adds things that you don't often see but are important, like what do you do with an unruly person who won't calm down? And, what is the procedure for that? Some of our county rules dealt with that, and such as the Planning Commission is fairly robust on that front, but it was completely absent under these circumstances, so that you have to go under, you to look at the parliamentarian, which is me, and I say this is what is traditionally done. The chair might say, that sounds good, let's try it that way. Or, you might just say, hey, deputy, remove that person, and there's really no one meeting to the next. So anyway, I've tried to balance it. I've matched it off of the premium, the best of our localities. Of course, there's a difference between cities and counties. There's a difference between counties, between executive forms of government and traditional forms of government. We're a traditional form of government, but I had to take that into consideration. Sent it out, as you know, I don't know, 6, 7 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, whatever it was, because it is robust and it does incorporate everything. And there are some things, I know Mr. Bush is going to bring something up tonight, which is a good point. It's sort of a very sophisticated provision. It's a lame duck provision, and there's some political aspects to it, and you might not want that in there. There's a reason that it was in there, but there aren't too many of those. Where there was something that might be, hey, how does this really work? I did put a provision that rule can be suspended by majority vote. So there's nothing in here that is written in stone other than is absolutely required by law. And so I think that it is a very good foundational document. I put it together with help from staff, from other staff, obviously Dr. Young and community development, things like that. But so that may sound like, why would I put something together that I didn't think was good? But it is because we've looked at the best of the counties, be it, large counties that have been going for a long time. For whatever reason, we didn't have bylaws in place. So you don't need bylaws under the law, but that's the way that it should be done. And it's much more of a roadmap, especially. I had an eye, the last thing I'll say, Madam Chair, you and Mr. Stonehill especially, and Ms. Binder said, hey, when you come on new, there's really you go to Vallejo training or whatever it is, and like, how come there isn't something about how things work? I don't want to learn procedure. I don't want to be an expert in procedure. I'm supposed to represent people on substantive matters. So I tried to make this with Dr. Young a tool that you wouldn't have to become a mini expert in Robert's rules. So I know there are a few questions. I think there are a total of 6, and I would encourage us to go through those few questions. I can answer the questions. I think one may require a little bit of debate, the lame duck provision. And then I would encourage you to substantively pass it. And it is a living document, and what's not working, you can amend it at any time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Britton. So, colleagues, would you like to be afforded the opportunity to ask your questions of Mr. Britton right now, prior to moving and seconding and then having discussion? Why don't I'll give each of you the opportunity to go ahead and ask your questions of Mr. Britton now, because I know a couple of you do have some. So I will go ahead and start on the left with Mr. Granger.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Britton. Thank you for putting these together. I really do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I read through them. I also read some of the questions. I don't have any further questions, so I'll just move it down the line and let Mr. Bush have a go at his questions. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I like the bylaws. Thank you to everybody that worked on them. But I did have one concern with the land use portion, specific to the lame duck portion of that. So it currently reads that no land use decisions or deliberations would take place between the election, which would take place in November, and then the seating of a new board in January. So my points were
Excuse
that
me,
a member
Mr.
that
Bush,
serves
excuse me.
on the
This
board.
is, sorry, I just wanted to say it's page, just for people maybe following along, page 23, 8, Charlie 3.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
So members are elected to the Board of Supervisors to serve a full 4-year term, not 3 years and 10 months. The thing that is also problematic with that is you may have a land use issue come before the board that has been with through the planning commission and then with the board for, let's say, a year and a half. And then it gets up to where it's time to make a decision, but an election takes place. So now you've caused a delay, which could be costly to whoever put in the application. But what it allows for is, let's say it's a year where we have 3 supervisors up for election and you have 3 chairs that switch out. Now you're pushing it off till 3 new supervisors potentially come onto the board to make a decision on something they have no historical knowledge about. So my request would be to strike the land use provision that's in the bylaws and let the board proceed as they normally do on decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender?
Now, I only want to point out one, it's under public comment, number 6, comments in writing. My only concern was making sure that the comments that the public does send in by email get recorded in the minutes so that anyone can look at them without having to request a FOIA request.
Thank you, Ms. Bender. Mr. Stonehill?
I really don't have any other questions. The only thing that I picked up on was the date on the first page, which has been changed. I think it's a long time coming. I think everybody that worked on this did a great job. I think it's very good. It's in plain English. It's, really anybody can understand. You don't have to be an attorney to muddle through this. But I think it's a very good job. I wonder about the land use aspect of it. I mean, myself and Mrs. Kupka basically got into that same situation when we took office. I'm not sure that needs to be struck out of there or not.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. So I just had a couple of questions. First off, thank you very much, everyone, staff, for all of your work on this. We really appreciate all the time and effort you put into this to help us streamline our processes and run a more efficient meeting. So with regard to the point that Mr. Bush brought up, there's a clause at the end that says, unless such action on the matter is consistent with law. Mr. Britton, could you give us an example of when that would be?
Sorry.
When that would kick into effect?
Yes, and I actually had that amended in case you wanted to keep the provision, but it was unclear. And that language, which is commonly used, I've amended to required by law. So that would be a situation in which you have 12 months to hear a matter, and it has been filed, and somebody it just happens to be set and fall. And there's a lame duck, and it has to be heard. And then there's another trash can or savings provision, sometimes called a trash can provision, where you can just throw it away by majority vote and get rid of it as well. And Madam Chair, if I could address the genesis of this, and this is an esoteric, it's sort of a cutting edge thing. It's some people like it and some people don't like it. The reason is in Prince William County, a supervisor in the early 90s lost the election and was for a land use matter, residential mixed land use matter, I believe, and convinced the board in that lame duck period, the rest of the board, knowing that his successor was against it, convinced the board to pass it. And litigation ensued, and long years and many hundreds of thousands of dollars went by. And so this was the solution. And as Mr. Bush has pointed out, and he has good reasons not to want it, both in terms of empowerment to make decisions for a full term, also the fact that a person might be voting on something that they had no knowledge of that's been around for 1 or 2 other hearings. Not that they couldn't go back and look at the tapes or whatever, but it's a disempowerment, disenfranchisement issue where then they try and bring it back up, right? And that person wasn't on either side, and now, and anyway, so that is the genesis of it. But if this is sort of a very is not seminal at all to this document, to the bylaws. This is a very clear provision as a result of one case and one circumstance that some boards put in and some don't. So this is one of those ones where I think that could be debated over the course of a year, whether to insert it. Somebody could bring it back or not next year. And I don't think this should hold up the process. This is an unusual circumstance. But that is the genesis, and it should really say unless required by law. If you do choose to vote to keep it in, I think it should, instead of said, as it does, it should say required.
Thank you. And then my second question is with regard to the suggestion that Ms. Binder had correspondence entered into the record. Are we talking about all correspondence? Because there's, and I guess maybe this is me discussing, but there is no way I can have all of my correspondence, and I think all of us, all the emails we receive entered into the record. So to me, that seems burdensome, but can you explain what the requirements would be for that?
Yes, Madam Chair, could you tell me which, I was trying to find that when Ms. Binder was speaking. I can tell you what the point is. It's
Ms.
that
Binder, if you want to, if
Yeah.
you have a reference, if you want to point out exactly which sentence that you,
what page?
The only thing I wanted to, what I was trying to get is if for a public hearing. And I'm going to clarify that just so that people submit their correspondence, and especially in the time of COVID, so that it gets entered in the record.
Section 7C6.
Yeah.
Okay, section 7C6, I'm going down to it.
I mean, if there's a way we could phrase that.
I figured that out, since there's.
so the section on conduct of public hearings starts on page 22, so it's going to be at some point.
We're looking at 7C6, talks about the public record. 7D6, excuse me, on page 19. Okay, the chair may also allow members of the public to submit comments in writing. Such written comments may be read in part or in whole or submitted to the minutes without reading. So this is just, especially under electronic meetings and remote participation now under the new budget and your rules, that means that at a public hearing, if you allow, which you now have to, remote participation or letters, number one, you don't have to read it all. Number two, you can, or you can read some, but you have to put the record in, you have to put the full comment into the record for reading by the public at a later time, or if there was a challenge, so that the court could see what it was. But there's no, I don't know of any requirement, and I wrote this, that where the board member would have to bring in, like if you received 1,822 letters in between one board meeting, bring those in. In fact, a board member could say, I've received 16 pieces of correspondence and half of them said this and half of them said that, and that would be fine. So there's no requirement in here or at law for a board member to report on correspondence they receive, communications of any kind. And even if you do report on it, it's not like a courtroom where you can't read from the thing without handing up the document, so you can do that. One of the reasons that this was in here was just for alacrity, for just moving forward quickly, because I know that some people, especially new board members, think that every single word in a letter they receive has to be read in, and that's not the case. You know, you can just say against, you know, Joe Jones from Dahlgren, against. Susie Q from Shiloh, against. And I just wanted to know that. But if you do that at a public hearing, the document itself has to be entered into the record.
Very good, thank you. I don't have any further questions. So is there a motion?
I will make a motion to adopt the bylaws as stated in our packet.
Madam Chair, I think
Yes.
that there was
Oh, yeah.
still the provision of 8C3. I think Mr. Bush was gonna, I don't know if he was
Okay.
moving
I
to,
was
he had,
requesting to have that as presented, but amended to reflect striking that provision.
Or you could do a friendly amendment, Mr. Bush.
Yes, do a friendly amendment. It's been a
Thank
while
you,
since
Madam
I've made
Chair.
one.
I respectfully request to amend Ms. Bender's motion to reflect striking of the lame duck provision for land use.
Second.
Section 8, Roman numeral 8, capital C, Charlie, number 3.
On page 23, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Just so we're all tracking the same. We have a motion properly seconded. Discussion. We'll go down the line again. Mr. Granger.
No, ma'am.
Mr. Bush.
No, ma'am.
Ms. Bender.
No, ma'am.
Mr. Stonehill.
I'm still thinking that just needs to stay in as is. Because I'm going to run into these situations where, you know, unless it's something that we have to by law, like Mr. Britton said, that it's a time limit or something, I think that we're going to run into these situations where if I understand where Mr. Bush is coming from about things that have been going on for, you know, 3.5 years or something, and then you get a new board that comes in. But when you go into this, we're going to get into the same situation where we were this year, where if something comes up, you know, the last couple of meetings in, you know, December or November after the new elections, that the new board is now going to have to handle. And if it's something that they're not agreeing to, I think they need to hold off on something where it comes in an important land use matter. One of the big ones like that, I think it needs to be the incoming board needs to have some type of say in that, because they're the ones that are going to have to deal with it for the next 4 years. So I'm not in favor of that.
So the only caution that I would say is, I guess I like to be optimistic and think that fairly most of the people who choose to run for this office do their homework. I believe in the case of myself and Mr. Stonehill, although I certainly do not speak for Mr. Stonehill right now, we made a point to attend fairly nearly every Board of Supervisor meeting during the year prior to our office, so that we would purposely know what was going on. I know I myself, I don't know if anyone else does, but I make a point to go through the minutes, the agenda before the Planning Commission meeting comes up every month. And then once the minutes of the last meeting are posted, I read through those too. So I feel like I do my homework, and that if I were in this position, knowing what I did a year ago now, 2019, when I prepared to take this seat, that I would have done my homework, and I certainly would have expected anyone else coming in to have done the same. I think that if perhaps we get to a point where maybe we have an instance where that doesn't happen, we need to change it. But as of right now, I think I would look to keep it in, just for that reason. Go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my point would then come back to, it would also, the word was used earlier by Mr. Britton, it would be disenfranchising a duly elected official to make a decision which outside of an election year would normally be on the agenda. So it would be basically prohibiting a duly elected official from carrying out their duty for personalities and political ramifications from an election. That's all I would add. And then I'll just defer to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call. All right, we have a motion properly seconded. We've had discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Chair votes aye, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make the amendments and send them to Dr. Young.
All right, at this time, we need to appoint a citizen to the King George County Service Authority Board of Directors. Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first off, I would like to take a moment and to thank Mr. Mike Bennett for his years of dedicated service to the Service Authority Board of Directors, and his willingness to continue to serve in an advisory role when called upon. The job didn't pay that much. Mike put a lot of time, saw us through some big changes in the Service Authority, so his willingness to serve is just greatly appreciated. With that, I'd like to make an appointment of an individual that most of us are fairly knowledgeable about. She has a extensive financial and banking background. She has served on the Budget Advisory Committee and the Infrastructure Advisory Committee and is a customer of the Service Authority. With that, Madam Chair, I would like to appoint Ms. Carrie Cleveland to the Service Authority Board of Directors.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Um,
Go ahead, Mr. Granger.
Yes, ma'am. I just had a quick question. My recollection is that we've appointed the Service Authority for a one-year term in the past. And so my question is, do we need to appoint the whole board again for those who will be serving on the Service Authority?
I thought it was for a full term. So, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
When I made my appointment for Mr. Bennett, it was to serve my full term. So he was the representative for the James Road District, so it was a 4-year term. And I'm sorry that I didn't specify. Ms. Cleveland's appointment would be for the remainder of Mr. Bennett's unserved term since he submitted his resignation. It was a 4-year.
Yes, sir. I just verified with one of my clerks. It is a 4-year term.
All right, so your motion is amended. Remainder of the term of Mr. Bennett
I'll second that.
and the second then. Very good, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, and I believe at this time, we will take a recess of the Board of Supervisors so that the King George County Service Authority Board of Directors may meet to have their organizational meeting.
Directors, of the Service Authority, allowing for electronic participation by some members with a quorum physically present. This action is taken as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the governor's orders regarding limiting of gatherings and staying in place during a disaster. Electronic participation is encouraged, and pursuant to the governor's emergency orders, social distancing shall be maintained for all physically present. If you choose to be physically present, you will be screened by authorized staff for signs and symptoms of illness. Based on the results of that screening, certain physical attendees may be denied entry. The following members are present. I'd ask that you all state your name and state that you are present.
James Morris, attending and present.
Annie Kupka, physically present.
Kathy Binder, physically present.
Carrie Cleveland, physically present.
Alan Parker, attending remotely.
The following members are participating through electronic means. It has been noted that Mr. Alan Parker is participating via electronic means. After notifying the chair that temporary disabilities and/or other medical conditions exist that prevent the member's physical attendance. I direct the clerk to include in this statement and any statement of remotely participating board members to be memorialized in the minutes. That then brings us to the organizational meeting of the Board of Directors. I'd like to call for a nomination for the chairman of the King George County Service Authority Board of Directors.
I would like to nominate Ms. Annie Kupka as the chairwoman of the King George Board of Directors for the Service Authority.
Second.
We have a motion that's properly second. Is there a discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Congratulations, Chairman Kupka.
Thank you very much. All right, call for nominations for the election of vice chair. I wish to nominate Mr. Jim Morris, Vice Chairman of the King George County Service Authority Board of Directors.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. And call for nomination of Secretary Treasurer, it's called on the Service Authority Board of Directors side.
I call for the nomination of Dr. Young to be the Secretary Treasurer of the King George Board of Directors for the Service Authority.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Sorry, that was an aye, correct, Mr. Parker? I cut you off.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. All right, 2021 public meeting schedule. Dr. Young.
Yes, Madam Chair, there has been a proposed meeting schedule that was passed by the Board of Supervisors and included in the packet for the King George County Service Authority. I recommend that the proposed meeting schedule be adopted as presented.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that the 2021 meeting schedule be accepted as presented.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just one question. Do we want to set the time at 5:30 like we did last year in the same motion?
Yes, I'd recommend that the time be set.
Madam Chair, I'd like to amend my motion to add 5:30 PM as the start time for the meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Bender.
Second.
Thank you all. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. All right, any amendments to the agenda, Dr. Young? I'm sorry, Mr. Weekly.
I just want to make sure the agenda you should have before you tonight, there's no amendments first, Madam Chair, just for point of clarity I apologize, there was a prior agenda circulating, so before you tonight, you should not have rules and procedures for your consideration. Britt and I have discussed that is not on tonight's agenda. That will be taken up later, and the board of directors will to adopt the rates in this coming year. So more aligned around June and somewhere in that time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Weekly. Public comment. Do we have anyone in the audience wishing to come forward to provide public comment? Seeing none, Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online? Thank you. So at this time, I'll close public comment for the Service Authority Board of Directors and move on to reports of members of the board. I would like to start with Mr. Parker since he is attending remotely. Go ahead, Mr. Parker.
No report, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Morris.
No report, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Binder.
I just want to thank everyone for my time as a chairwoman last year. I think we did a lot of good things, and I just want to thank my colleagues for the confidence in me and congratulate Mr. Morris and Ms. Kupka for their roles as chairman and vice chairman. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Binder. Ms. Cleveland.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Bush for the appointment and the confidence in me. And also thank you to Mr. Bennett for all of his time and contributions to this board. And I look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland. For my report, I'd like to say welcome aboard, Ms. Cleveland. I'd like to thank Ms. Binder for her service and her leadership last year during a very trying time. I will have something for you in my next board report at the next meeting. So I'll close with that, and let's move forward with the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Report from County Attorney, Mr. Britton.
No report, Madam Chair. What do I have? Oh, I'm sorry. Under this, we did have the, apologies. I sent out to the board, both boards actually, the Dolly or Virginia OSHA. We don't, localities aren't subject to federal OSHA, but we have a Virginia OSHA called Bosch, I think is it. And the Dolly standards, the temporary Dolly standards came in earlier, as you know, Madam Chair, as a result of COVID-19. And basically you had to go through and designate all of your employees and say whether they were essential or not, and make certain provisions for them. That's a very, very small simplification, and it took Amanda and her team a long time, I'm sure. But they did that. Now the legislature is trying to make them permanent. And I brought that to your attention at this time, even though it's an organizational meeting, because the comments are due. And so we indeed do have some objections. We've already received objections, as you'll hear on the board side, the county side, from Chief Moody. I myself outlined a few in a memo that I sent out, which I think is in this packet. And I would ask you to consider, unless you want those standards to just be made permanent blanket forever, which were, supposedly as a result of an emergent global pandemic, that most people who are faced with actually implementing them do not want them as is. So I would ask the board to consider empowering Mr. Weekly to gather and submit on behalf of the board of directors comments as he may see fit based on his knowledge and experience. And the same motion will come before the board of directors. In fact, Chief Moody has already submitted to Mr. Young on that side a fairly robust. I had more legalistic concerns, but Chief Moody has more boots on the ground concerns. So basically it was, we got this inch, let's not give it up. And some people may be for that type of legislating, some people may be against it, but there are some very practical considerations that at least we ought to be able to, at this point, voice. And that's all they're asking for, and the deadline is the 9th. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. Do my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Britton before we move on and entertain this?
No question.
I don't have any questions.
No questions.
Mr. Parker, do you have any questions for Mr. Britton?
No questions, ma'am.
Thank you. So do I have a motion to direct Mr. Weekly to gather director's comments?
I will make a motion for Mr. Weekly to gather director's comments to be submitted.
I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
If I may?
Yes,
Madam
go
Chair?
ahead, Dr. Young.
I'd recommend that you all amend that motion, seeing that there's a deadline for these comments to be submitted, authorizing the general manager to collect those comments and write comments on behalf of the board of directors in response to the changes that are coming from the VOSH standards.
By the date January
January 9th.
9th, was it, Mr.
That's
Britton?
correct. He needs
Madam
to write.
Chair, I agree with Dr. Young, and the motion should say, and empower him to submit them. I think he could have collected them, and submit them on behalf of the board of directors, because that's what you're really empowering him to do. So I agree with Dr. Young. It should say to submit comments.
Okay, I will reframe the motion to be, I direct Mr. Weekly to, or we direct Mr. Weekly to gather comments by, I'm going to say January 8th, which allows Mr. Weekly to be able to prepare a document by January 9th for submittal to have our, I guess, would it be objections, Mr. Britton, or our concerns? Either or?
Comments are
Our
fine.
comments on the VOSHA standards. Does that work?
I
Yes.
second that.
VOSH is the law, DOLI is Department of Labor and Industry that implements it.
So we have a motion properly seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Britton. Skip down to General Manager's report. Mr. Weekly, do I understand you will not have a report this evening?
There's no report. I just want to make mention, just to give you a heads up, for next meeting, we'll have the CAFR. That's our financial documents. Both boards, it's my understanding, will be taking that up. So the request was from Rob Farmer Cox to present that to the Board of Directors at the next meeting, our second meeting in January. So I'm just giving you a heads up. Generally, they give us those documents in advance. So as soon as I have those, if it's electronic, you'll get electronic. If it's hard copies, I'll make notification it's in the box. So I just want to make you aware of that. And then one quick update on the Utility Relief Fund, the CARES Act fund that was specifically related to helping customers who are in arrears. As you may recall, and for Ms. Cleveland, who's new to the board, we were awarded around $210,000 to help customers who are in arrears. So far to date, we've received 108 applications to the total of $98,788. So we're about 50% of the state, and I'll ask Mr. Britton to chime in. I believe the information they just sent via the Omnibus bill, well, not the state, but the Fed's Omnibus bill extended the deadline to carry those funds. It was originally we had to return funds by January 29th of this year, and I believe that is now, sir, extended to December of 2021 to return those funds.
Yeah, I sent a memo out on it. I can look it up. I sent a memo to the board and to Mr. Weekly. There's no more funds. You can't use them for anything different, but you can keep using them until the end of March, I think. I could look it up real quick.
Well, just basically, we will continue to push forward to expend those funds and get the notices out. Staff's been working hard. We've done KG alerts. We've put out door hangers, and we will continue to work that. So that was merely an update of where we're at on using those funds. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Weekly. And Mr. Britton, if you can't find that right away, we're going to go ahead and move on. And that's definitely something that you can just email the Board of Directors at some point tomorrow during your workday. All right, let's move on. Do we have any information items, Mr. Weekly? I don't see any here.
No information items, Madam Chair.
So then we would need to adjourn, and I would note we adopted a calendar, correct, that was January 19th, and we would want the time to say 5:30. However, I might suggest that we say location to be determined by the outcome of the Board of Supervisors meeting. Is that something that we could do that way, since the governing body has not decided one of our discussion items for this evening?
I was asking to frame the motion with that in mind, so.
Awesome. Go right ahead, Ms. Bender.
All right, I would like to adjourn this meeting to January 19th, 2021 at 5:30 PM at a location to be determined by the King George Board of Supervisors in their meeting, either King George High School or the Rivercombe Building.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Everybody ready? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Dines, are you all ready up there? Thank you very much. All right, I'd like to reconvene the meeting of the King George County Board of Supervisors. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
Madam Chair, I do have an amendment.
Go ahead, Ms. Bender.
I would like to nominate the following members to the King George County Service Authority Board of Directors for a term that ends in December 31st of 2021. That would be myself, Kathy Bender, serving the Shiloh District, Mr. Jim Morris, serving the Dahlgren District, Ms. Annie Kupka, serving the at-large district, Ms. Carrie Cleveland, serving the James Monroe District, and Mr. Alan Parker, serving the James Madison District.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Public comment. Do we have anyone in the audience wishing to make public comment? Seeing none, Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online wishing to provide public comment? All right, I'll close public comment. Reports of members of the board. And we will go ahead and start on the right this time with Ms. Bender.
I go for the first now. I used to be the last one to report. I want to once again thank everyone and my colleagues for being very supportive last year during a very tough year in this COVID 2020. I think we did great things. Even in a challenging year, I just want to thank them for their confidence. I want to also thank Mr. Stonehill for being the vice chairman now, and also Ms. Kupka for being the chairwoman. And I forgot to do this in the Service Authority, Ms. Carrie Cleveland for joining us in the James Monroe District on the Service Authority Board of Directors. And that's what I want to say, but I do have two appointments that I would like to mention. I would like to nominate Mr. Siddell Brooks Jr. to the Social Services Board.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Second person I would like to nominate Ms. Sandra Wemberly to the term of the rest of the term of Mr. Dylan Tieford, which expired on December 31st of this year, to the Economic Development Authority.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bender. Mr. Stonehill.
Madam Chair, rest of the board, Happy New Year. Looking forward to maybe a more calm year this year, hopefully. Keep all our fingers crossed. Ms. Cleveland, welcome aboard to the Service Authority. On December 16th, I went with the sheriff's office to Walmart to do a modified shop with a sheriff, which they do every year. This year we couldn't have the kids show up due to the restrictions that Richmond put on everybody. We ended up with 35 kids who then gave out wish lists, and we had volunteers go through Walmart shopping for them, which their presents were then delivered to them at a later date. On the 21st, again, I met with the sheriff's office and their staff and the YMCA for handing out all the gifts at the YMCA. All the families and their kids came in one at a time in 5 or 10 minute intervals to pick up their gifts. It's always a great time. I just wanted to say thank you very much to the Y, anybody who donated to that cause, Walmart, and of course the sheriff's office for all their work and support of doing that. And I have one nomination to the EDA as well. I would like to nominate Delane Richards from the Dahlgren area, who lives down in Mammoth Woods. She is a Pentagon worker with 33 years of service. It seems like she brings a lot of experience to it. So I would like to nominate her to fill the Dahlgren position that's being left by Ms. Newman.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
That's a 4-year term, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. That it, Mr. Stonehill?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
That's okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure you were finished. Thank you. Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope everyone had a Merry Christmas and a good riddance to 2020. I would like to congratulate Ms. Kupka on her appointment to chair and Mr. Stonehill as our vice, and thank Ms. Bender for her challenging year, to say the least, in service to our board and our community. With that, I would just like to say that in standing with my previous sentiments and statements, and with the support of my family and in keeping with my conscience, I will not be seeking re-election for the Janesville Road District seat on the Board of Supervisors. I am entering my final year of a 4-year term, and there is still a lot of work to be done. I will remain focused to the task, just as I had campaigned on when I first sought election through terms in. It has been and remains my greatest honor to serve and represent my neighbors in the Janesville Road District of King George County, Virginia. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Granger?
Yes, ma'am. I'd just like to say thank you to Ms. Bender for your leadership through this past year. It's been a challenging year. Thank you for helping us through that, and the rest of my board members as well for just having the cordial meetings and behaving professionally. So not that it's unexpected, but it's always nice to see. So thank you to all of you as well. Thank you to those citizens who are volunteering for the Service Authority Board, Ms. Cleveland, Mr. Morris, and Mr. Parker. I appreciate your service and your willingness to serve this county. So thank you for doing that as well. And congratulations, Ms. Kupka and Mr. Stonehill, on your appointments to the chair and the vice chair. And I think it's going to be a good year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. To my colleagues, thank you all very much for your confidence. Mr. Stonehill, congratulations. Vice Chairman Stonehill. I just have 2 brief things. I do have an appointment to make. I move to reappoint Mr. Gary Kendrick to the Planning Commission for the term that expires on January 31st, 2021.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Recognition. Ms. Bender. I wish to thank and acknowledge the service of Kathy Bender, Shiloh Supervisor, as Chairman for 2020. Thank you for your leadership and commitment to our community during what likely will be recorded as the most trying time of our generation. So, Ms. Bender, with that, I have something for you. And then I just want to thank my colleagues for adopting the bylaws and rules and procedures this evening. I think it's going to go a long way towards streamlining our meetings. I do this for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons is I've noticed both in my time this past year on the board and also in coming to meetings before and quite frankly as staff, that our staff is here very late. And we very much appreciate everything that they do for us. But I feel like at times we do them a disservice, maybe by talking a little bit more than we need to about things. So how this is going to work going forward, much like you saw tonight, if there are things that we have opportunity ahead of the motion to ask staff questions, I will offer every member that opportunity, just like I did with Mr. Britton. If we have Ms. Hall here or her staff presenting a zoning issue, we'll handle that way. You can ask your questions, and then we'll get on to the motion. And if it's properly seconded, we'll have discussion. I will give every member a turn to discuss. But what I want to try to avoid is a lot of ping-ponging back and forth. Everyone will get their turn. I may give a member a second turn if I feel someone has a particular expertise. Here's an example. Mr. Bush is a veteran. If it's that kind of issue, I probably would be more inclined to give him a second turn if I thought he had something more of value to say. Perhaps if it's an issue in Ms. Binder's district, in the Shiloh district, if it's a Shiloh district matter, she may get a second turn. But I really feel strongly that we need to keep the pace of the meeting moving. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from in how we'll be doing things. And also, if we can keep our board reports to the time length specified in the bylaws, that would be great too. All right, and that being said, I know Ms. Binder had one more thing she'd like to say, so I will go ahead and give her one more opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Ms. Binder.
Thank you very much. I apologize, and some people might know I can be humble, but I did want to make it. Mr. Bush reminded me when he gave his speech, because I appreciate serving with Mr. Bush, but I did want to announce that I will seek a second term in the Shiloh district because I think we have a lot more to do, and I want to see him through. So I want to just tell everyone out there, I am going to seek a second term. Thank you very much for affording me, Ms. Kupka, the second chance to say that. Thank you.
All right, then, moving on, consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
May I ask, Dr. Young, did we have a minor amendment to the minutes? Can you share that with everyone? I only asked because I know I brought it up and I'm not sure if the rest of my members were made aware of it.
Yes, Madam Chair. I believe that in the minutes it captured that there's an adjournment to January 5th, 2020, but that should be noted that it's January 5th, 2021.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Move to adopt the minutes with that modification as presented by Dr. Young.
I'll second that.
Thank you all very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. County officials reports. Report of the county attorney, Mr. Britton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things. Actually, I guess three. One is I did find the Articles of Incorporation, and I just showed them to you. It was a 4-year back in 1992 when you incorporated the Service Authority. It was a 4-year term, so there was no problem. And yes, and reappointing the slate year and year has been a tradition, and that's just reappointing. But everybody was originally appointed for the same 4-year term, so everything's copacetic. And I think I used that word correctly. I just learned it. And another matter is I just wanted to inform you, a copy, I printed it out. I sent this, the Electoral Board, the Democratic Committee made a nomination, and Judge Hewitt that is not a board appointment. That is nominated by the political committee, and then 3 people go up on a slate, and the judge determines whether or not the person is appointed. And the judge asked me to draft the order, which I did.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. Do any of the members have any questions for you? For him, I'm sorry.
And
All right, go ahead, Mr. Britton.
I was trying to, we have the Dolly or VOSH standards that I just went over this. Apologize with the Board of Directors, which was correctly impaneled. Dolly, the Department of Labor and Industry, administers rules, which are OSHA if you're federal. They're VOSH if you're Virginia. OSHA doesn't apply to localities. These rules have a January 9th deadline for comments. I looked at them legally, had some comments. I think the board should know, so I sent it out. You might want to make some comments. These aren't perfect. They were supposed to be temporary as a result of the global pandemic. And as I said in the board of directors meeting, in every state, that's kind of legislation where you get a foothold and then you keep it. Some people like that and some people don't. So I thought I should bring it to your attention. However, the more concerning issue was the folks down in Richmond. They do the best. They have ideas, but they don't necessarily know how things get implemented or actually work on the ground. And maybe that's not their fault. Maybe they haven't. It's new, and maybe they haven't done it, or maybe no one's done it. But in any event, the people who actually do it, the boots on the ground, they're the ones that know. And I think that, as with Mr. Weekly, he should be able to submit comments on behalf of the board of director. And I think that the sheriff, Dr. Young, certainly Chief Moody, who's already made comments, myself. So I would ask that the board consider voting to give the authority to Dr. Young to submit comments on behalf of the Board of Supervisors. They're just comments at this point, on or before the January 9th, 2021 deadline to the proposed VOSH standards being made permanent.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. So I know my colleagues were in the audience when this was presented to the Service Authority Board of Directors, but I just want to offer to any of you, do any of my colleagues sitting here now have any questions for Mr. Britton related to this? No, Mr. Granger, go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know that this is comments that we would be submitting, but would it be permissible or appropriate to strongly oppose, or to put some language in addition to the comments that these are the concerns? Could there be language in there that we strongly oppose these things? And I bring that to where we have our emergency declaration, and it's to address the situation at hand, and then there's an end to it. This would take basically an emergency situation and the provisions they put in place and make them permanent even after COVID hopefully is gone. So I would just request that we could have put in additional language to strongly oppose this measure if it's appropriate at this comment stage of the evolution.
That would be a will of the board, Madam Chair. So that would require a vote. That would not be a practicable or legal concerns. So that would be a political statement, which is certainly permissible. To Mr. Bush's direct question, I don't, which was, is it necessary at this time? Appropriate at this time? It is appropriate. Whether or not there will be a subsequent a comment gathering period, I don't know. But in abundance of caution, if the board wishes to make a political statement as well, I suggest that you vote on it and direct Dr. Young to submit it with his other comments, because there may be no other chance at this given the fast-moving legislation relating to COVID-19.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. So what you're saying is that if we choose to do so, we would need to take a public vote this evening in order to do so, because this is the last time we meet publicly prior to the January 9th deadline, right?
Yes, and Dr. Young wouldn't be able to just say, it sure sounded to me like the board's against it, because that would be actually acting on behalf of the board.
Very good. Thanks for the clarification. Anything else, Mr. Bush? No, thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Stonehill?
Nothing further.
Ms. Bender?
Nothing further.
Very good then. Do we have a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to authorize the county administrator to gather comments and reply with those comments on behalf of the Board of Supervisors for the January 9th deadline, with language containing the board's strong opposition to the measures of permanently implementing VOSH standards.
Second.
Any further discussion? So all I would say is that in addition to our formal submission as a board, if my colleagues, those who have not also done their own personal public comment, you might also want to do that as a private citizen as well. If you all have not done that, there's a website, and the link I think is in some of the correspondence that Mr. Britton sent to us. All right, so we have a motion properly seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, Mr. Stonehill, I didn't mean to cut you off. Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. Is that all you had for us this evening?
Yes, Madam Chair, nothing further.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on. Action items. Appointment of board members to boards and commissions. Dr. Young, I see you provided the current list of boards and commissions and committee assignments for each member in the packet, and I know I did direct you to poll the board by email to see if there was anyone who wished to have a change in assignment or appointment. Do you have any member who would like to do so?
I did not receive any feedback regarding a request for changes, Madam Chair.
Very good. And I received a response from one member indicating that he did not wish to change any assignments. So can we move then to reappoint the slate of committee assignments as presented then?
I move to appoint board members to the area boards and commissions as presented in the board packet.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you all. All right, discussion. Creation of a cigarette tax committee. Dr. Young and/or tag teaming with Mr. Britton, I'd like you all to open the discussion for us on this item.
Yes, Madam Chair. We are seeking guidance from the board regarding the direction that they wish to take with the upcoming cigarette taxing authority. Currently, we have two options that's been made available to the board. Number one, a Northern Neck cigarette taxing authority, and we have also been invited to join the agenda for the Northern Virginia cigarette taxing authority. With the beginning of the new year, we're waiting for the director of the Nova Cigarette Taxing Board to return down to business, and we'll see when that meeting is supposed to take place. But I've also heard concerns about the thoughts that maybe there should be, the taxing authority should remain local. And we just wanted to get some type of guidance from the board on which direction that you wanted to direct the staff regarding moving forward to research logistics to put the administration of the tax in place.
Thank you, Dr. Young. And so members, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them, and feel free whether your question is for Dr. Young or Mr. Britton. Go ahead, Mr. Granger, we will start with you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You said to join the agenda for the NOVA Taxing Authority. Does that mean just to go, are we being formally invited to join the taxing authority, or is this just to go to a meeting to find out if we would be invited?
This would be with my discussions with the director for the taxing authority. It was a request to be added onto the agenda to lobby for membership.
Okay.
So basically, it'd be a request where myself and Mr. Britton actually goes up to the taxing authority, sits before the executive board, does a presentation, basically introducing them to King George County and the potential revenue that it brings to the authority, with a request that would be considered for membership.
Okay. Mr. Britton, do you know of a good reason why we wouldn't? Obviously, this board's already, the Northern Virginia one's been in existence, as opposed to the other ones, which we kind of standing up to be able to do that activity. Is there a reason we wouldn't want to join an existing authority? And if so, could you share what maybe some of those are?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Granger, there are pros and cons. I couldn't say a reason why we wouldn't or would. I believe Mr. Stonehill could address that and be more appropriate in terms of an opinion, but I can give you the pros and cons. And I just wanted to add one thing to what Dr. Young said for some background. He's been working on this with a lot of different angles, a lot of different meetings. I've been in a fraction of those, but one of the ones that I was at, the chairman of the board was a part of some big taxation meeting, which basically, as far as I could tell, was the Department of Taxation saying, we don't want to do this. Please don't make us do this. During that meeting, the only thing I chimed in was that the Northern Virginia Cigarette Tax Board said, we're full up. We got maybe one or two more slots and Loudon wants to come in. So I was like, well, I'm going to chime in here. I said, are you telling everybody on this call not to apply to the board? And all of a sudden it was like, I can't do that. I'm just a single board member. You know that. I'm a lawyer. You're a lawyer. So we're just going up there, as far as I know, to say, hey, you may not know a lot about King George County, but it's the 5th smallest county by size, and it's got a whole lot of cigarette sales because we're on the border. It's kind of easy pickings. We realize Loudoun County is a big county, but we probably actually, so that's where we're at on getting on the agenda. So that was even sort of a coup that Dr. Young made. There's absolutely no reason not to do that, because then the decision would be made for us if we said no. The Northern Virginia Cigarette Tax Board has, like any board, it's a functioning bureaucracy. And we're going to be a newcomer. We're going to be the farthest county on that board. I think Fredericksburg is on it. They did their own thing for a while because they're a city. That's why they've been on for a while. So, you know, the new legislation is counties, but there were 2 counties. But cities always, and towns always, if they wanted, tax cigarettes. Going into, we've never done this before. There are some complications. There aren't a lot of them. There's less than 10, but you got to get a die. You got to get a stamp. You got to buy stamps. You got to disseminate the stamps. You got to make sure that the merchants put the stamps on. You got to make sure that they don't steam them off. You got to make sure that they're selling all the cigarettes with stamps. You got to make sure that they're not selling ones without stamps. You got to get these reports from the industry, this is old Star reports if you can, or whatever the new ones are. You got to collect that money. Then you got to get the receipts for cigarettes and make sure the cigarettes match receipt, and on, like you would do in any business. Except for there's a high compliance. So there's no compliance, medium compliance, and then there's high compliance, like firearms, tobacco, and alcohol. So, you know, we have a whole bureau, BATF. So this is a highly regulated industry, and so there's a lot of compliance. So the negatives are that it's a startup, and every startup has bumps, and we don't know what we're doing. On the other side of that, there are a lot of people who can tell us what to do, and it's really not that difficult. Another negative, we would have to get people to do it. You know, you can't just say, oh, Miss Hart, here's a whole other thing that's going to be $8 million of revenue a year, just, you know, divided amongst the people you already have. We've already talked to her about that, and that is, I'm just overwhelmed already. Treasurer's office, same thing. Finance, same thing. Probably the sheriff's office, same thing. On the pro side, you know, you're the master of your own kingdom. So you make sure that it's run well, that it's run honestly, that it's run with, you know, with dignified and integrity, and that when you have an officer going and making the rounds to do the spot inspections, it actually happens. I think the last point I would make, that this is anecdotal evidence, but whenever you get involved with a large board and we're far away, maybe your calls don't get answered quite as quick, or they don't show up to the meetings that they say they'll show up to and give the, you know, we have had a little bit of trouble getting in contact, and it's COVID, it's Christmas, it's New Year's, people get hurt, all that stuff, I get that, but this is a big deal to a small county. And so in sum, we would have to learn the game. And if we go to Northern Virginia, they're going to do everything, and their fee is very, very low. It's about 6%. And in tax collection, that's good. The Department of Taxation generally, would collect around 10%. And as you know from our tax, they can collect by law 20%. And if you hired a lawyer to do collections, it'd be up to 30%. So 6% is a good low number. And one of the counties, the last thing I'll say that is doing for them is that they're collecting for is Fairfax County and Arlington County. And presumably they have a pretty high oversight of what's going on in terms of auditing Northern Virginia Tax Board, and they've been there for a lot of years. So I would think they're doing a good job. So those are the pros and cons, but there's no problem. If I had my druthers back and forth, I would say that there's no harm in joining the Northern Virginia Board if they'll have us so we can learn the ropes at that 6%. If they were taking 26%, and the negative is if they're not responding to us, if they're not getting around, if they're not collecting everything, then we don't have our own infrastructure all of a sudden.
But if we move forward with going to the agenda meeting, we're not committed necessarily.
No, we were actually just asking whether we could submit a formal application, I think.
Okay, then I would think that, my personal opinion, I think we should move forward with at least pushing for the application, and let's not just cut that off right now. But I am interested in hearing when it gets down to Mr. Stonehill, because as you said, he probably has some opinions, and so I'll be interested to hear what he has to say as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. Dr. Young, did you look like you had something to add, or?
Yes, Madam Chair. So just to give a little bit more background on the group that Matt was referencing, the General Assembly established a study working group for how counties would be able to seamlessly administer the cigarette taxing authority. That group was made up of the representatives from the Department of Taxation, industry leaders in the cigarette and tobacco industry, and local government representatives that were invited to sit in on the working group, which included county administrators and commissioners of revenue. I attended every meeting that was held by the working group, and there's one thing that is very concerning that I need to make the board abundantly aware of. The industry was the big elephant in the room, the big dog in the room, and they were really the driver of this working group, even more so than the Department of Taxation. The Department of Taxation official stance was, look, we don't have the capacity to take on this additional burden, so that's going to be the recommendations that we bring back to the General Assembly. Industry, what do you want to do? They even asked the industry leaders what they wanted to do over what local governments wanted to do. The industry leaders, number one recommendation that they're going to capture in the study is they want to push the taxing authority to the right because they don't believe that they're going to have the logistics, or the local governments are going to have the local counties are going to have the logistics in place to properly administer that tax. Naturally, the local governments are pushing off on that because that's lost revenue for counties. Naturally, there'd be a fight for, hey, no, we want to maintain that July 1st date for the authorization for the tax. But here's the second biggest thing that the industry leaders were pushing to move to the General Assembly was a recommendation that, hey, we don't want these piecemealed taxing ordinances across the Commonwealth. With 95 counties, we don't have to travel over a county line and we meet this ordinance, but then when we travel over another county line, we have to meet this ordinance. They want to make a recommendation to the General Assembly that, hey, counties won't be afforded an opportunity to implement the cigarette tax unless they have a regional authority, and we can approach compliance from a regional approach versus a local approach. So what this regional authority is, whether it be the Northern Virginia Cigarette Tax Board or if it be the Northern Neck Cigarette Tax Board, it's an insurance policy for us in the event that the General Assembly does cave to lobbyists to say, hey, you can't implement the tax if you have a regional authority. Well, if we kill the Northern Neck Regional Authority, which is the easiest barrier into getting into an authority, or if we don't continue a push or we're denied entry into the Northern Virginia Cigarette Taxing Authority, then we're going to find ourselves flat-footed on July 1st. And that's going to put the county in a position where we're going to lose revenue. So that's why my recommendation, number one, is to continue to allow the staff to pursue a dual-pronged approach to trying to get into the Northern Virginia, which, of course, like Matt said, is a heavy lift, and continue to try to craft something with the Northern Neck community, because admittedly, in that relationship, we be the lions in that relationship, and we'll be the leader in that partnership versus us being the beggars in the Northern Virginia CTB. And that's my recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Young. So just so we're clear tonight, all we're trying to accomplish is create a committee for our own community to kind of flesh this out and investigate and make a recommendation that whether it was to join the Northern Virginia Taxing Authority or a prospective Northern Neck Taxing Authority, there could not be any commitment on behalf of the county without a public vote by the governing body. So I just want to make sure we're all clear on that we're just looking to establish a committee tonight to continue to flesh this out. We're not committing one way or the other to any particular course of action, right?
Yes, Madam Chair. It would just be the typical motion would be to do all things, impaneling a committee to do all things necessary to obtain and bring the information before the board to make a decision on how to implement the cigarette tax for the county.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. With that, let me move on. Did you have anything else, Mr. Granger? All right. Let's move on to Mr. Bush. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the clarity about the committee. So I have a couple of questions, and then I'm going to touch on the committee. First off, between Northern Virginia Board and the Northern Neck Board, is there any variation in the percentage that they charge? Do they both charge 6%, or is one higher than the other?
There is no Northern Neck Board. We would be starting it.
Yeah, it's not created yet. So I don't know what that established administrative cost was going to look like, but I'd have to assume that actually would it be in the Northern Neck could be cheaper than.
So the timeline for this creation of a Northern Neck, obviously it would have to take place before 1 July and be ready to roll at 1 July. Is it reasonable to say that Northern Neck will not be created for us to be able to implement anything by 1 July?
No, sir. We actually have been having meetings. It started off small with just King George County, Westmoreland, and Richmond County, but we're actually starting to see more of the Northern Neck communities, towns coming to the meetings. Naturally, we haven't had a meeting this year. And when I say representatives, what I mean is the local managers of those localities. And they had a draft bylaws. It just hasn't been reviewed by the county attorneys and hasn't been discussed yet by the local managers. But I have 100% confidence that the ease of entry into that partnership would be a whole lot easier, and it could be accomplished before July 1st.
So if we could accomplish it, I would like to see us go that route, especially since Northern Virginia is just entertaining the idea. I don't see any harm in taking the meeting, but I would like to be looking at Northern Neck and kind of keeping things regionally, especially if we would be the line in the room. But what I don't want to happen is that as this is being constructed, or if we're waiting on input from a committee, for this to drag out and we miss the mark of 1 July. I believe that we do have to join a regional board for what you have already covered in the concerns with the General Assembly and what the lobbying group for the tobacco industry would most likely be pushing for. I don't think it's reasonable that the county should be looking to manage this on our own. One, we don't have the staff. It will be an extra demand on law enforcement, but I'll defer to the expertise of Mr. Stonehill on that. But then there's stand-up cost, potential compliance litigation that we would be facing. I believe that a regional partnership is something that we look at. And I'll end with saying this. I think there's merit in some committees, as far as our Budget Advisory Committee, the Infrastructure Advisory Committee. But at some point, in something of this nature, especially when it's concerning a tax, and we know the ins and outs of what our financial obligations are, what our potential revenue and those shortfalls are going to be, I believe that having a committee to tell us things we already know, it kind of pushes it off. I think this is a decision that we as elected officials need to be able to take the information and make. This is one thing that I wouldn't want to put another stopgap in it, or another review agency. I think, or not agency, but group. I believe this is something that the Board of Supervisors needs to address. And that's my concern. So I'd be against the formation of the committee, just to get back to the point. So, Madam Chair, that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Ms. Bender, I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll let Mr. Stonehill go last, because I think he probably has a lot that he can share based on his prior experience.
And I'm going to defer to him because he has much more experience in this than I do. So, Mr. Stonehill, take it away.
Thank you. That was very gracious, Ms. Bender.
I've worked with the Northern Virginia folks quite a bit. And like I said in the past, I'm not overly impressed with them. We are definitely, if we did join that, we would definitely be the furthest away. And, the kind of redheaded stepchild that would probably be bringing the largest slice of the pie to them because of the amount of cigarettes that are sold here in King George. The head of their department or that agency was supposed to come down here, and she 3 times now kind of blew us off. Never even showed up. It's the easiest way to go for sure, if they would, if we can get on with them. And like we talked about in the past, to get on there and do that, a year, 2 years, 3 years, find out how to do it correctly, and then take it on ourselves, and then save all that money that they're taking here in King George County. So that's definitely the easiest way if they'll take us. But we can't even get on there. We finally got on their agenda. We don't even know if they're going to take us. I know they're looking at another, Fauquier or somebody up north as well. But if they're full up and they're looking at even to take another county that's up closer to them in Northern Virginia, what are they going to do with King George? And, and they get all the numbers, and they know the amount of cigarettes that come out. So they know the amount of money that they would be making off of us. Northern Virginia Cigarette Board, if we could come up with that, I just don't see that with all those different counties being formed in time. I mean, we're pushing it right now. Yeah, the Northern Neck Cigarette Tax Board. I just can't even see that coming around. I mean, we're going to be hard pressed now, even if we did it on our own, to get something up by July 1. But we certainly need to get that going. Myself, Sheriff Giles, I spoke to, we're in favor of doing it in-house. Once again, King George is looking to farm something out where, we could do it here ourselves. Talking to Dr. Young on a previous call, we were talking about having to hire somebody if we did the Northern Neck group at $80,000, $90,000 from here in King George to basically run that. And you look at the sales of cigarettes in Colonial Beach, Whitestone, those areas that are down in the Northern Neck. I mean, they pale compared to what ours are. So why would a little group down there want to join up with a board up here in King George where they're not going to, they're not pushing a whole lot of cigarettes? And for them, those folks down there, who are the people who are buying the cigarettes down in that area? It's their own locality, their own local people. It's the people that are down there on vacation for summer houses and things like that. Whereas opposed to here in King George, 95% of it is going to be, travelers, coming and going, so it's not going to really affect the King George citizens. I mean, it will a little bit, but the majority of that is going to be paid for by tourists and, people who are making a living selling cigarettes up north doing that. To spend $80,000 to have an employee create this system and, be in charge of the Northern Neck Cigarette Task Board, I just don't think is the way to go. I had a meeting with Mrs. Hart and Sheriff Giles. In their staffing right now, no, they can't do it. There's no way that they can handle it. But Mrs. Hart said that, if we had a person in her office at, $35,000 to $40,000 a year, and Sheriff Giles had a person at, at his starting salary of $48,500, somewhere in that neighborhood, between those two, we could do this ourselves. It would cost us, 2 employees. It would cost us stamps. It's possible. I mean, I don't think it's all that difficult. I called down and I talked to the city of Richmond, and they've been doing it for a long time. That's a big city with a lot of cigarette sales down there, and they do it completely by themselves. They buy all their cigarette, the stamps come from their director of finance's office, and they take care of everything themselves. If we did form up this committee, and I'm not a huge fan of committees either, but if we did have this committee that from the different departments, that would just empower them to go out and seek out information. They could go to Richmond, they could go to some of these other cities and towns that have been doing this and learn how to do it. This would be a working group to go out and gather information, to bring it back, to present to the rest of the board and say, this is what we found out, this is where we can go, and go from there. I mean, like I said, the easiest thing is the Northern Virginia group, if they'll do it, but we don't know if they're going to do it. But if we did form a committee to do this, it would be, basically just investigating and implementing the, how to create the King George County cigarette tax if we don't go with one of these regional committees. But like I said, I'm not a committee person myself, but this was something that, definitely has a direction and has to be done by, May or June, because we're behind the ball right now. And the amount of money that, that we're looking at right here, I mean, it's, the type of revenue that the dump brings in. So we are certainly missing out on a lot of money that we certainly could use right now. So that's why I would be in favor of getting this, working committee from revenue, law enforcement, supervisors, and staff, and to, get something rolling and to go out there and just gather this information, go to Richmond, like I said, and, find out how to do it, speak to the folks that actually create the stamps, get some prices. They've also said that, yeah, we've set up towns, we've set up counties, and we can tell you exactly how to do it and hold your hand step by step to get it implemented. So, like I said, it's just a lot of information that we need to gather and bring back for board approval.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. I do not have any questions. I believe all the questions I had for staff have now been answered. So I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Stonehill?
I move to have the King George Board of Supervisors impanel a cigarette tax working committee for the purpose of investigating and implementing the King George County cigarette tax beginning July 1, 2021, pursuant to state law. The committee shall be empowered to do all things necessary that do not require board action or public hearings in order to investigate, research, review, and determine the best methods and manner to implement a county cigarette tax. I move that the following people be appointed to the CTWC, which would be Mrs. Hart from the Revenue's Office, Dr. Young, Mr. Britton, Sheriff Giles, and myself.
I'll second.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Granger.
No. Mr. Stonehill, I'll just say thank you for your inputs and crafting the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. Mr. Bush.
So I think Mr. Stonehill brought up some very valid points, but the one thing that I would caution about, if we are to move forward with this committee, and this is to set up a county-run authority or county office to implement this, we're talking about staffing. So the staffing came up about salaries, but what's not accounted for is the benefits package. So that cost goes up exponentially. And then the upfront cost of stamps and actually implementing this. To be implemented by 1 July, we've been spending a lot of money, but a lot of that money was CARES Act funding. So that wasn't necessarily coming from our budget. But we're going to have significant shortfalls in our revenues. And I don't know if we could even truly afford. I know there's going to be money to be made on the back end, and we're going to see revenues coming in. But that fronting of a lot of money, I don't know where that money's going to come from. I like if we were to do this and if there was money, the names that were just read, I fully support. I think that's the right people to be on this committee. I just don't like the idea that we're looking at running this as a county right now when we don't even know what we don't know. There needs to be, this is the first time we're going to have this authority to be able to do this. I really think we should be looking more at pursuing conversations. If we had a committee, let's have a committee to work with other counties in forming the Northern Neck Board Authority, or let's focus all our efforts into engagement with the NOVA board. I think I don't think this is prudent. So I would remain opposed to the tax committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Bush, would it help if Mr. Stonehill reread the motion for you? Because I'm not sure you heard everything in the motion.
If he wants to reread it, fine.
Madam Chair.
So if we could, excuse me, Mr. Bush, Ms. Bender?
I had one question, and if he's rereading it, it would go with it, is a timeline where they would have to come back since we're worried about a July 1st deadline. That's what my question was going to be.
So I'm going to respectfully request that Mr. Stonehill reread the motion. Thank you.
I move to have the King George Board of Supervisors impanel a cigarette tax working committee for the purpose of investigating and implementing the King George County cigarette tax beginning July 1, 2021, pursuant to state law. The committee shall be empowered to do all things necessary that do not require board action or public hearing in order to investigate, research, review, and determine the best methods and manner to implement a county cigarette tax.
They can come back with a recommendation to join.
Correct. I
Thank
hope
you.
you appreciate why I did that, but I wanted to make sure you understood there was a big difference between what he moved and what you said
And I now
in
see
your
it.
discussion.
Yes, that first portion, I was mixing some words in my head, so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bender, continue, please.
microphone isn't working there. I just wanted to clarify, I was trying to help Mr. Bush too, if we had a timeline for when it would be, the committee would report back. So if there was a decision about joining or creating our own, it could be all done before the July 1st deadline.
Does staff wish to speak to that?
We'll serve at the pleasure of the board, whatever timeline that the board desires to see, the research. I'd recommend giving the committee 90 days. At least that would give us enough turnaround time and reaction time in the event that, some major logistical point or policy was discovered. The board can make a decision and we can get some type of react time in order to meet that July 1st timeline.
And I think that's why we put this on for discussion and consideration this evening, because we need to get the ball rolling, because the goal is, in fact, if we possibly can, to implement July 1st. So,
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Britton, go ahead.
If I just could, I wouldn't put the timeline in the motion. I'm not suggesting that Ms. Binder's suggesting that, but the power of the committee is that they serve at the will and pleasure of the board. And so you would just direct that after the committee was impaneled. The concern without the committee, of course, is if you have a board member on, if you have a committee. If you don't, what if 3 of you want to go to meet with the sheriff of Richmond? Or what if different people want to go up to the Northern Virginia, and then we have a board meeting? And so that's the power of the committee. And but what I would say is that you could have that a recommendation for how to implement it, because the board can't decide. The committee can't decide, only the board can do that. Should be no later than, I agree with Dr. Young, the second meeting in March, because we're talking about advertising the public. I got to write the ordinance. We got to advertise it. Y'all got to debate it. Maybe you want to go back. Maybe you get a lot of comments. I doubt it, but maybe you do. If we do our own thing, that's easier. If we do the Northern Neck thing, then we got to go to every county. We got to create a committee. I don't think you could do the Northern Neck thing in less than 90 days for sure. But 90 days would be a sensible minimum from a staff perspective to do it ourselves. We get on the Northern Virginia board, usually go to a bunch of meetings. But if we do it ourselves, I think we'd need 90 days to even advertise and get it all passed and buy the stuff. And we can get a report back in by the second meeting in March.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. Ms. Binder, are you satisfied to allow the motion to stand?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, so just to make sure we met all timelines. I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Binder. Mr. Stonehill, anything further?
No, nothing further.
Ms. Kupka, any question about timeline?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Ms. Kupka. So if we do move forward with this committee and this timeline to get feedback, would this prevent us from or prevent any action on the Northern Virginia board? You said earlier that we were invited to be on their agenda to present to them. Would that still be moving forward just in the event that the committee came back and said, we recommend you join Northern Virginia Authority? I just want to make sure we're not preventing them by passing this. We're not preventing them from taking that action. Okay. All right. I'm good.
Mr. Granger, did you have something to add?
No, ma'am. I'm good. Thank
Okay,
you.
so we will round out discussion. We have a motion properly seconded discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, discussion item, discussion to return business meetings to the boardroom. Dr. Young, would you like to provide a staff, I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Britton?
apologize to keep beating this horse, but then, Madam Chair, now that you have your committee, you should direct the committee to keep you updated and to give a final report with recommendations no later than the second meeting of March.
Very good. I hereby, can I just say that?
Yeah,
Just
as a
repeat what
committee,
you
you can
said.
do
I
that.
hereby direct the committee to keep the Board of Supervisors informed and to provide a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors by the second meeting in March.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Young, with regard to discussion, return to the Revercombe boardroom for meetings. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair. So we just wanted to get the staff wanted to get guidance from the board on if you all desire to continue maintaining the business meetings in the high school, or if the board would like to return to the boardroom to conduct their business meetings. And then we'll advertise accordingly.
So, members, do you have questions of staff? Mr. Granger? Mr. Bush?
I don't have any questions.
Questions? Yep. Thank you, sir. Mr. Stonehill?
Nothing.
Ms. Bender?
No.
All right, then, do we have a motion, or do we need to move? Do we actually need to have a motion proper, or is this merely consensus of the board, Mr. Britton?
No, what locations of the board one meeting here?
Well, we did a to be determined for the board of directors, so we.
I think it's a matter of advertisement, though.
Right.
I think
because
you'd be
we
better
have-
off with a motion,
yeah,
Madam
because
Chair.
we
I think it's
have-
a matter of debate and motion, actually, because we do have to advertise.
Authorize staff to advertise.
Exactly.
Okay, very good then. So do we have a motion?
I move to return business meetings of the Board of Supervisors to the Rivercombe boardroom.
Second.
Do we want to amend that and authorize staff to advertise same? Mr. Britton, is that necessary?
No, it would just be in this instance, and then we would have to advertise the motions to advertise the board meeting schedule would be a separate motion, but the board would have to move to return business going forward or in 2021 or until further notice, as Mr. Bush just said. I don't know if he said that last little bit, but that's first thing.
We're adopting the calendar tonight.
Yeah, then when you adopt the calendar, you would authorize the advertisement at the boardroom. Two motions.
All right, so we have a motion properly seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Granger?
Just would say if we have a meeting that we know is going to be heavily attended, I think it would be wise to maybe still use this venue, which I know then we would have to advertise that separately, but it wouldn't affect the motion, but just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. Mr. Bush?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Stonehill?
Miss these lights.
Ms. Bender?
I just have one question for Mr. Britton. Do we have to add the service authority into that motion?
Nope, y'all said to.
We did it.
Okay,
to
I
be
just wanted to
determined
clarify and
by
make
the Board
sure.
of Supervisors.
So our outcome's already covered.
Yep.
Yes,
I just wanted to make sure. All right, thank you.
thank you.
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, when the Planning Commission resumes their meetings, they're to be held back in the Rivercombe boardroom, if I saw that correctly online, for next week's meeting. And I feel like I saw an advertisement in the newspaper today to the same effect, that they were going to be held. Did I see that correctly? And I would note this is still discussion, so that's why I said that.
Well, ours still show meeting at the Rivercombe building.
Yeah. No, I would just say that as long as we can be mindful of social distancing, and I think even when we were meeting there before we came here, we did a good job of that. And as Mr. Granger stated, unless we have a public hearing that we think is going to be heavily attended, obviously that would be a public hearing, gets separately advertised in advance, so that would be the opportunity to make sure the location got changed. So I wouldn't be opposed to it at all. All right, anyone else? We have a motion properly seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. And so we said there was a second.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Go ahead,
to-
Mr. Britton.
I think in order would be a motion to direct the county administrator to advertise, and he's also the clerk of the board of directors, to advertise until further notice, 2021 Board of Director and Board of Supervisor meeting in the Revercombe building.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. And Dr. Young, County Administrator's report. Do you have anything for us this evening, sir?
No report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. And move to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn to January 19th, 2021 at the Rivercombe Building at 6:30.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye, motion carries. We are adjourned.